Well, welcome to our 2 days through the amazing book of Esther. Esther is one of the only books in the Bible where God is not mentioned. And yet, as you read the story, the whole point of the story is that the invisible hand of God is so powerfully at work through the very goings on of history and in this particular story. And so this is a book that celebrates the power and wisdom and influence of God in our world, and yet never mentions him. So it's a wonderful book. Today we read the first 5 chapters of Esther, and I want to comment on something that's always actually confused me as I've read the story, and as I thought about it this morning, prayed about it, and read Matthew Henry's commentary. The very thing that I've never understood is the thing that I actually want to comment on today, because I think I see something in it. So this is from verses 6 to 8 of chapter 5. The threat of the extermination of the Jews has now been tabled. The law has been passed by the king. Mordecai has managed to get a message through to Esther that this is the reason she's become queen. She's got to really show some courage now and defend her people. And she's got to go and ask the king. And she eventually gets around to the fact, okay, I will do it. She goes into the king's presence. He accepts her, extends the golden scepter, which means she wasn't going to get killed for walking into his presence uninvited. So he welcomes her in. And he says, what can I do for you? And she says, well, join me, you and your prime minister, Haman, who she knows is the bad guy. She says, you and Haman join me at a banquet. So that day they put on this banquet and they're busy enjoying the banquet, the 3 of them. And the king then again says to Esther, what is it that you want? What do you want to ask me for? I'll give you anything you want up to half my kingdom, which was a proverbial expression in those days to say, I'll give you anything you want as long as it's reasonable. Herod used the same expression in his day. And it's at that moment now that one would have expected Esther to say, here's what's happened, king. I am actually a Jew. My people, the Jews, there's been an order given that we should be exterminated by this wicked Haman. Now, that's what you expect her to say. Instead, let me read you what happens. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What's your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. So she's at a banquet with the king and Haman. He says, what do you want? And she says, well, come again tomorrow. We're going to do another banquet tomorrow, and then I'll tell you what I want to ask you. And that's always confused me. Why didn't she just come out with it? And as Matthew Henry says, there may have been several answers to that question. Maybe she was fearful in that moment, and she didn't quite know how to say what she knew she needed to say and accuse this guy Haman that's now sitting in front of them. But more than likely, this was an unction or a prompting of the Holy Spirit that maybe she didn't even realize consciously was, but in her spirit she knew the time was not right to make this request, and so she delayed. She didn't delay endlessly. She said, tomorrow I will tell you. So she's not endlessly procrastinating this job she knew she had to do, but she just didn't feel right about saying it now. And I think there is a great lesson in life for all of us. Because the question may be asked, was this a strange losing of heart? Was she like second guessing and maybe had she changed her mind about this risk that she was going to take by accusing Haman and asking the king to intervene? Had she lost her nerve? No, because as it turns out, as we're going to read now in chapter 6 verse 1, which will be the first verse we read tomorrow, if Esther had not had done that, the plan would not have worked. The extra day that the delay gave them, in that day, everything, all these miraculous things happened that set up her request of the king the next day. And chapter 6, verse 1, I'll just read that to you, and I'm sure you know the story already, but it says, that night, as the delay has now been given, and she says, okay, I'll tell you tomorrow. That night, the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was as he read the Chronicles of the king that he then is reminded of the event that we read of today, when Mordecai had warned the king of an assassination plot against him. And it's then that he then says, oh, well, what's been done for Mordecai? Let's reward him. He calls Haman in, and Haman is forced to now give Mordecai his position as prime minister effectively, and the whole thing is falling apart for Haman now, and now they've got to go to the banquet. And so Mordecai has been exalted in the sight of the king, and Haman has now, his downfall has been set up for Esther to now make that request of the king. So it wouldn't have worked without the delay. And this was all in the providence and in the secret workings of God. And part of the secret workings of God, my friend, is how you are led by the Holy Spirit. You know, the New Testament says that whoever is led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. This is one of the great ways in which the Christian is privileged over the non-Christian. It's one of the advantages that we have in life, is that we can be led by the Spirit. And a lot of the time, you won't even know consciously that it is the Spirit leading you, but He is leading you. And so, I think the take home is, when you face a very important decision, when you are faced with a very important conversation, and you have prayed and you are feeling the urgency of it, even if the whole world is clamoring upon you to go ahead and act and make the decision, if in that moment you just feel like, man, I just need to wait, I just don't feel a peace about acting right now, I'm going to delay, I'm going to give myself 24 hours. And in that 24 hours, as Esther would definitely have done, you can spend more time in prayer about this thing. You can maybe seek counsel. You can just wait upon the Lord for another day. And often it's that extra day of waiting that will make all the difference. It's that extra bit of prayer that will make all the difference. So don't be afraid to just wait. When there's a big decision to take or a big conversation you need to have with someone, to just wait. You know, we're all too prone to rushing these things, to getting them out the way. And sometimes it's just good to wait. If you feel that in your spirit, let it sit. And you might just find that night, the change happens. God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow.